Welcome to the Timescales Interviews. I'm Grego, your host. Today we have a very special guest, the multi-talented author, Doctor Who expert, and lecturer, Mr. Michael Herbert. Hello, Mr. Herbert. How are you today?
Hello, Greg, and it's Michael.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you for inviting me onto your show, and nice to meet all of yourself and interact with your viewers.
Well, thank you for your time. People are going about ready to learn a few interesting things here, and I thank you in advance. This interview is being conducted in California, and I'm presuming you are in England. Am I correct?
That's correct. I'm actually in what used to be called Lancashire, so it's in the north of England. We're about 10, 12 miles from Manchester, which you might have heard of. So we're in part of the country here, which was at the heart of the Industrial Revolution, which started in the late 18th century, and the mechanization of the spinning and the weaving of cotton, which kind of transformed Lancashire and England, and eventually the whole world. So for good or ill, this is where the Industrial Revolution started.
Okay.
And 200 years later, we got the internet, so it was all worthwhile, obviously.
No doubt. So what is it like there today?
Wet and cold. So I think T.S. Eliot said that April is the cruelest month, but I think January is the cruelest month.
Yeah.
It's always wet and miserable.
Yeah, this January was the cruelest month in California. We had an incredibly huge amount of rain for some odd reason. Yeah, but it's cleared up. It's clear blue skies today. Just a bit cold. So, Michael, I have to admit that you are the one and only first person that I've ever had the pleasure to interview that has actually taught Doctor Who as a lecturer in college. I want to sign up for that. Could you please enlighten us on that?
Well, I did it a few years ago. I think it was 2015. I was teaching in the evening class. I retired in 2011 from full-time work. And then I kind of got more involved in history, which I've been doing for many years, studying working class history. So I was running courses at a college not too far away in Stockport, again, another old sort of industrial revolution town. And it was running courses so I went down and started doing courses on the history of Manchester and the history of women. And then I suddenly suggested to them that we should do a try Doctor Who course. So I did that for one term. And we kind of worked our way through the sort of story of the series from the first Doctor through to the 1987. I didn't go beyond that, I don't think. And it was an enjoyable thing to do, and it got quite a lot of publicity. I mean, if I was doing it now, I would probably do it on Zoom, but there was no such, well, nobody had heard of Zoom in those days. Right. So we did it in a classroom where we'd study the history of the show and then watch an episode or two episodes and then discuss it. So it was enjoyable, but the people on the course all knew it really, but they just wanted to be with other people who were interested in the series and discuss it. So that was fair enough.
Okay.
Yeah, enjoyed it.
Yeah, I do remember it being discussed, and I never had any idea that someday I would actually be speaking with you. It's really neat. So folks, Mr. Herbert has contributed to a brand new book that has just been released. It is titled Survival TV, 1970s Britain and the Television Series. This new publication is described as, and we do have a synopsis here. I could read that, or you could read it.
You read it, Greg. You're the host.
All right.
And it's still Michael, by the way.
Okay, yes, sir. Periods of political and social conflict tend to be the perfect breeding grounds for innovative fiction. 1970s Britain, with its all too frequent states of emergency, saw television script writers respond creatively to both the general sense of doom and a growing public desire for cultural change across a wide range of genres: sci-fi, cop shows, political drama, sitcoms, anthology series, action adventure, and children's drama, among others. Amidst the social and political unrest, it would prove to be a remarkable decade for television, as color TV made its way into increasing numbers of households, and the three television channels produced an impressive range of iconic series which frequently challenged the status quo. Survival TV explores a wide range of television series, including Doctor Who, The Tomorrow People, UFO, Space 1999, The Guardians, 1990, The Shadows of Fear, Thriller, The Sweeney, Survivors, Blake Seven, The New Avengers, Zodiac, The Fall and Rise of Reginald Perrin, Terry and June, Butterflies, The Persuaders, and popular U.S. imports. In a diverse decade, millions of viewers were sharing these shows, and television series sometimes appeared to represent the main social glue. Whew, okay. And yes, I do have it ordered.
This collection was edited by Rodney Marshall, who's kind of indefatigable in producing books on television series of the past. He specialized, his father was Roger Marshall, who was involved in many TV series in the 60s and 70s, such as The Avengers and Public Eye, I think, and other ones such as that. So he's produced a lot of books on the Avengers, and then he's obviously started to produce other sort of genres, looking at the decades as a whole. So I happened to see a tweet by Rodney on Twitter, and I contacted him and said I was doing some research on Malcolm Hulke. And he said he'd be interested in an article, and then I kind of forgot about it. And then I suddenly thought, oh my God, what's a deadline? So I had about 3 days. So I raced through what I'd written and kind of shaped it and turned it into an article which he seemed to like. So I was very pleased to contribute. So one of the things that might shock American viewers is that we only had 3 channels.
Right,
two run by the BBC, BBC One, and somewhat unimaginatively BBC Two, which was seen as a more kind of arty, cultural channel, or it was then. It's changed a bit. And then there was ITV, and that was it. We didn't get another channel, which again, very unimaginatively, was called Channel 4 until 1982, I think. So viewing was dominated by these 3 channels, and particularly by BBC One and BBC Two. So everyone watched more or less the same things. People would switch from one to the other. ITV was seen as a more kind of working class channel because it had adverts, more game shows. The BBC was seen as kind of educational, kind of rather highbrow. Again, that sort of changed in the 60s and 70s. And also the whole process of creating TV was much quicker. I think it goes through endless layers of bureaucracy nowadays, whereas I was reading about the Avengers series, the 60s Avengers series, and how when it started, I think they got it going in 6 weeks flat from the first idea to sort of starting filming. So you had an idea, you went to somebody and they said, okay, let's try that. Okay, get some actors, get some writers, let's do it. And so I think because of that speed of reaction, the TV was more responsive. I wouldn't say that it was a radical cultural medium, but I think the things that were going on in Britain in the 60s and then the 70s particularly did find their ways into TV series. Issues such as racism, relationships between men and women, relationships between the government and its people, industrial relations and conflicts, Northern Ireland, conflict which ran throughout that period, into some of these shows, or Britain's entry into the European, or what was then the common market in 73, which was sort of picked up, I think, in a couple of Peladon, I think the Peladon serials, when the Peladon is sort of joining the Galactic Federation, and clearly a sort of parallel idea of Britain joining the European Union.
Okay.
And the environment pops up a lot in Doctor Who in this period, doesn't it? The Green Death and other. It's also someone now pointed, not me, but someone to all the in the 60s, the kind of problems are often kind of silver. You've got mechanoids, you've got the Cybermen, whereas in the 70s, Doctor Who is very much about the environment, and lots of the kind of monsters or problems are kind of green. The other thing, of course, is we did get colour TV in Britain, so we gradually moved into an era where the black and white was left behind and people could afford, I think about 76, more colour TVs are being sold in black and white.
Right.
So there's a huge amount of TV produced, and some of it's very imaginative. And a lot of it would never be put on now because it takes time to tell a story. TV is much quicker now, and that doesn't always work. I mean, Doctor Who is much quicker now, isn't it?
Yeah,
No, nobody
yeah.
does a 7. I mean, I suppose the War Games, 10 episodes of 25 minutes each.
Hmm.
Nobody would do that now. So I
Yeah,
think,
I remember I remember first starting to watch it, and I was very surprised about how long the episodes were. So would you say that this synopsis lists a massive amount of British television?
yeah,
Is the length something that all of these had in common, such
I
as how
think,
long?
yeah, I mean, we're getting like The Survivors, which you mentioned, which is a series I started rewatching. I couldn't watch it for 4 years because it was too parallels to what we're doing had gone through. So it's a series where a virus spreads around the world and most of humanity is killed off.
Mhm.
And this features what happens to the people who somehow survive this virus. So it seemed far too close to home to watch, but it was put on in
Yeah.
1975. So it's again written by Terry Nation, devised by Terry Nation. So it's part of his remit to try and get beyond the Daleks, I think. So
Right.
it's about, again, there's a lot of dystopian, a lot of pessimism. I suppose in the 60s, people were optimistic about the future. And after the sort of the wars of the early 70s and the oil crisis of 73, although at the moment it feels like we're revisiting history, doesn't it, Greg? Because we've now got an
Yeah.
energy crisis
Yeah.
caused
Unfortunately,
by
it
a
does.
war, and we've
Yeah.
got a cost of living crisis. So, and we've got industrial strife in Britain in a way we haven't seen for 30 or 40 years because people are struggling to make ends meet or failing to make ends meet. So suddenly
Yeah.
that period of the 70s, which seemed quite a long way away chronologically, but also socially, now seems suddenly very close to home. So a lot of those series, like The Tomorrow People, is about a group of children with special powers. But then you get the kind of rise of nitty gritty TV. So the sort of cop series in Britain, anyway, in the 50s and 60s are quite cozy. The police are always the good guys, and the
Mhm.
villains are always villains, or the criminals are always the criminals, and law and order always triumph. But a series like Special Branch, followed by the Sweeney, made by Houston Films, shot on film, which is much more vibrant, I think, much more fluid. You can do handheld cameras. You're not stuck in a studio with video. Suddenly becomes much more real and much more gritty. And the cops are very sort of sweary and drunken and lecherous. And they sort of mix with the criminals. Sometimes it's hard to tell the two apart. So it's taking a much more less less positive view of the police, much more dramatic view of the police, I think. So it was a huge success, The Sweeney. If you've not watched it, if you want to know what Britain was like in the 70s, full
Well,
of
see, it kind of sounds like our cops now.
yeah.
So, we, um, so you would say that the synopsis is accurate,
Yeah. And
and
also
yeah,
yeah, and also there wasn't all doom and gloom, so there were kind of cheerful domestic dramas like Butterflies, and again they're sort of Butterfly seems to be about a woman spending 5 series wondering if she should leave her husband or not. And again, you got the changing role of women. I mean, I think one of the big changes between then and now is the amount of parts given to women and their role as activists within drama. So they are the centre of much drama now that's made in Britain, and they play the key roles. And obviously, we've had Jodie Whittaker recently in Doctor Who, which probably would have been inconceivable 30, 40 years ago.
mhm,
And people have kind of taken it mostly without, without worrying about it. So, and
yeah,
on British TV, we now have an enormous number of women working, talking about sport. So sport until 20 years ago was purely just men droning on about football every Saturday, and now it's women droning on about football every Saturday. So,
Now, I see that this book has 8 authors,
mm,
yourself included. Rodney Marshall, Al Samuth, Stu Sterling, uh, yourself, Darren Flower, Kaylin Thomas, J.Z. Ferguson, Andrew Roberts, and then there are 2 other contributors, Trevor
mm,
Knight and Mike Pegler. And then, of course, it was edited by Rodney Marshall, as you mentioned. When the 10, or I guess 11 of you were working on this together, did you co-collaborate and compare notes in any way?
No, not at all, Greg.
Okay.
I only knew about the other people when I got my copy. So
Okay.
it was all coordinated by Rodney, and so I just sent it in, and he edited it, took out my spelling mistakes and whatever, and then he just put it out. So it was very quick turnaround. I think he got it by article in the beginning of December, and it came out in January. So he's kind of self-publishing it. So there's no pictures in it, so it's quite sort of straightforward, I think, to produce and relatively cheap, I'd imagine. So no, there
Okay.
was no collaboration between us at all. I didn't know what the other people were going to be writing about, although
Hmm.
when I got it, I clearly recognised the various TV series that they were discussing.
So I guess in a way, the consumers would be getting more than a half a dozen books for the price of one. That's and I did read your contribution. Thank you for sending a review copy over. And let's just say I was extremely impressed with your knowledge of Doctor Who. And if you ever offered another course on Doctor Who, like if you did it online, where I wouldn't have to come to England, I would actually take your course. So
All
you
right,
have
all
a
right.
student already. And
Okay. I'll put you down,
so
Greg.
okay, thank you. Folks, we're going to come back to this brand new book, Survival TV, 1970s Britain and the Television Series, here in a moment. I'm sure that series is proper. For some reason, it seems to me that that should say series is, because it is about more than one series.
Mm.
Um, so we're going to come back to that. And before we do so, a conventional part of this interview series is to dig a little bit deeper into who's being interviewed. So let's poke around here and find out just who Michael Herbert is. So Michael, about you, we want to know who you are. Tell us about your early years. Um, where do you come from, and what do you enjoy?
Mm. That's a deeply philosophical question, Greg.
Thank you.
I was watching a documentary on Netflix about Paul Gauguin, who did a painting called "Who Are We? Where Are We? Where Are We Going?" I think that's what you just asked me. I'm 67. I grew up in mostly in near London. We moved around a lot, but I went to school in a small town on the Thames, the River Thames, near London, west of London. Oh yeah, an interesting fact. It's a town where a bit of Doctor Who was actually filmed, although I was completely unaware of it, which shows you what life was like before the internet.
Hmm.
So the Ambassadors of Death, if you recall that,
Yes.
parts of it were filmed around Marlow in 1970. Or probably late 69, maybe. I'm not quite sure when they actually did it. But they used various locations, a quarry, and then there's a bit where Liz Shaw is being pursued and gets out of her car and runs across a field, which is near where some friends of mine used to live, because I recognised it when I watched it. And then there's a bit of a geographical jump where she ends up running along a weir on a river, which is very, very familiar. I knew that river because our school used to have an 8 that rode along that river. In fact, we nearly went over that weir one year. So I grew
Really?
up in Marlow, and then and I went to university in 73 in Manchester. I kind of stayed in the north of England ever since, really. Lived in Bolton, Liverpool, and back to Manchester. Met my partner around about 1980, and then now we live up in the hills, about 20 minutes by train from Manchester. I worked in local government for quite a lot of my life. Worked in doing births, marriages, and deaths, and then the latter part. I worked for a while representing my trade union full time, and then I worked in dealing with parking tickets where people got tickets for parking in the wrong place and complained about it. And then I retired in 2011. But during that period, I was also doing a lot of other things, like in my spare, or so what was laughingly called spare time. Career involved in the trade union movement, the socialist movement, and also got involved in history, sort of radical history around about 1980, when I met Ruth and Eddie Frau. And they had their own kind of library in their own house. They were sort of communists in their 60s, I suppose, or 70s when I first met them in
I'm
1980.
sorry, could you say their name again? Who was that?
Yeah, Ruth and Edmund Frow, F-R-O-W. So
Okay.
Eddie joined the party in the 20s, I think, quite early on. And Ruth joined in 1945, just after the Second World War. So Eddie was an engineering worker and Ruth was a teacher. So they were sort of strong party members. And it became very interested in history and started collecting radical histories from the late 18th century, beginning with Thomas Paine. So who's a figure both in American radical history, being involved in the American Revolution, writing the crisis pamphlets, one of the most famous one, which begins, "These are the times that try men's souls," which people still quote, and also played a role in the radical movement in Britain. So their kind of collection went from the 1790s, 1780s, right through to, a few weeks ago. So I got to know a lot about history through them, and they encouraged me to start researching and write. So because that's sort of, I never really looked backwards from that. I became very involved
Okay.
in sort of producing books and also creating conferences and encouraging other people, and also the library itself, which moved to a new location and needed lots of money raising.
Okay. So, aside from history, do you have any other hobbies or interests, such as stamp collecting, or are you a skydiver? No.
So I think on books, I've always enjoyed reading since I was small. I can't remember ever not being able to read. And I discovered science fiction quite early, possibly because of Doctor Who. So, I mean, I
Mhm.
do remember reading the first Doctor Who novels in '60, the Zarbi and the Crusaders, and the novel version of the very first, well, they kind of skipped a series, didn't they? It starts off with a completely different beginning of the Doctor meeting Ian and Barbara on a heath somewhere. And then it jumps to the Daleks on Skaro. So the David Whittaker's novelization completely misses out the cavemen, which might have been a good choice, really.
Yeah.
It's not the
So,
greatest.
so
But then also pop music. So around about, I was into orchestral music because of my family, but then about 69, 70, I discovered rock music and started buying LPs and going to gigs. And so I saw Creedence Clearwater Revival in 1970. In fact, they just put it out as a CD, which is so things which I've
oh,
been,
the they put out a CD of the live performance that you were at in
yeah, it's
1970.
the Albert Hall in 1970, which is very
Wow.
good. I recommend it to you. But there was a lot of progressive rock at that period. Then punk came along, so I was heavily into that, and then new wave and new romantics.
Okay, there we
My
go.
father
So,
was more into soul and disco and American black music, so kind of then we got into world music.
okay.
My
So
hearing has
who
been permanently ruined by going to see the Who several times, I think.
I've heard that they were very loud. That
Yeah,
them and Pink Floyd.
yeah, I
Uh,
saw Pink Floyd in about 72, I think, when he was just starting to do Dark Side of the Moon, I think. But yeah, the Who were astonishingly loud, much more than you would ever permit now, because all they did was pile up the amps on stage, Marshall amps or whatever, and just unleash a wall of sound at you.
a wall
So
of
that's
sound. Yeah.
mostly some of the things. I mean, then the history has always been an interest since I was a child.
Okay. So, something we've got some breaking news here. I just found out before we started recording that you have all of the missing episodes of Doctor Who from the 1960s, including Marco Polo.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they are stashed somewhere at the back of my head because I started watching Doctor Who in 1963 on the 23rd of November, I think it was. I watched them all as a child and I've seen them all. But if you can work out a way of connecting my brain to some kind of cyborg internet connection, you're welcome to have them, Greg, and show them next
Okay.
week.
All right. Fingers crossed. I really want to see Marco Polo. That's so you said that you were about 8 or 9 back when
Yeah.
you started watching those. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Um,
that the show. I think the reason why the show was like nothing else on TV. Just the way it started with the howl around effects and the music by Delia Derbyshire, or her revamp of a tune by Ron Grainer. was just like nothing else on TV at that point, really. And so the mix of history and science fiction, and the sort of science fiction was, quite different to the Zarbi. And you got the Daleks, and the Cybermen came along, the Mechanoids,
Hmm.
and and all the various things that went on. So
So
it was something quite different and quite addictive, I think.
addictive is a good way of putting it. Yeah, it's I don't know. A friend of mine, Will Hadcroft, shared his opinion with me on Doctor Who fandom, and the way he described it is that we all have a shared gene. And I thought that was an interesting way of putting it. So, as a school kid, did you have goals of becoming a writer, historian, or lecturer?
No, I
You
think
did.
I probably wanted to be Pete Townsend or something.
Okay, okay.
If
So,
I had any kind of goal at all.
okay. So,
Maybe
what?
maybe to meet some girls or something.
Yeah, no better way to impress a girl than with some Doctor Who knowledge, right? Hey, worked for my wife. So,
Need to set up a dating agency here, Greg. Then.
yeah, okay. Okay, so
Who they call it Who Meets Who.
who you know that's there was a discussion on Twitter not too long ago about what would be a good name for a Doctor Who dating website. And somebody came up with the perfect answer. I don't remember what it was right now. I'll have to look at that. I'll get back with you on that. That someone nailed it perfectly with what would be the perfect name
Oh,
for a
right.
Doctor Who dating website. So one of your published works is titled Doctor Who and the Communist: The Writing and Politics of Malcolm Hulke. And I watched you speaking of this book in a YouTube published documentary that included the lovely Katie Manning. And it is bleedingly apparent that you are an expert on Doctor Who and the writer Malcolm Hulke. Malcolm Hulke, for people that do not know, wrote the Doctor Who stories, The Faceless Ones with David Ellis, The War Games with Terrence Dicks, Doctor Who and the Silurians, The Ambassadors of Death. He was uncredited. He did a rewrite on that.
That's correct.
Colony in Space, The
Mhm.
Sea Devils, which there's a rumor out that The Sea Devils is being remastered and is going to be out soon. Who knows if that's a rumor? It needs to be done eventually. Frontier in Space and Invasion of the Dinosaurs. Could you kindly elaborate on this book, Doctor Who and the Communist: The Writing and Politics of Malcolm Hulke?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking, Greg. So
Yes,
this
sir.
is so it was a pamphlet rather than a book. So what happened was I got interested in Malcolm Hulke when I was looking. I mentioned the Working Class Movement Library, which is in Salford, which is the town next to Manchester. Don't mix the two up, otherwise
Okay.
Salfordians get upset.
Okay.
Um,
And you said the Working Class Movement Library?
yes, as I said, this was, as I mentioned earlier, the collection started by Ruth and Edmund Frow. And I was just looking through to see whether they had anything on Malcolm Hulke. I thought, well, perhaps I should try and do a bit of work on him. And discovered they had a pamphlet that he wrote for an organisation called Unity Theatre, which is a left-wing theatre company started in the 30s that ran through to about 75, I think. And so in the late 50s, he wrote a pamphlet. Malcolm was involved with Unity Theatre as a kind of producer and whatever. And so he used his skills as writing to do a pamphlet about what Unity Theatre was, how you could get involved, what your requirements would be. Basically saying it's all about you, you're a part of it for a democracy. So they had this pamphlet. That was my starting point. And then I thought I'd heard he was in the Communist Party. So I tried to do some research, but didn't find out a huge amount. I found out some things at that point. I wrote a blog post about it, I think, on my science fiction blog, Fantasies of Possibility, which is a quote from H.G. Wells. Then I kind of forgot about it because I thought I'd gone as far as I could. But I was contacted by a small publisher and a radical bookshop in Nottingham called Five Leaves Press, and they wanted to publish it. So I kind of revised it and added a few more things in. I had to guess at a few things, some of which I got right, some of which I got wrong.
Really? Okay.
But,
I've heard of that happening.
yeah, so yeah, again, history is always a matter of revising and going back again. So
Right.
that came out, and then I think I did a talk about it. There was a launch of it in Manchester, which Terence Dix came to. So he was a very good friend of Malcolm Hulke. They'd lived together. Well, rather more accurately, Terence lived in a house that Malcolm owned in Hampstead. And so
Okay.
Terence was a tenant there and was keen to get into TV. And Malcolm was being commissioned to write some episodes of The Avengers, the early 60s series. And so Terence wrote 4 of them with Malcolm, and they stayed in touch. And then when Terence became script editor of Doctor Who, then Malcolm was invited to work, to write a lot for them. So as you've listed there very accurately, he did 2 in the 60s, the Patrick Troughton, and then the rest in the John Pertwee. So Malcolm was writing for TV, had been in the Communist Party, done lots of menial, fairly ordinary jobs, but was keen to get into writing. And finally, working with a bloke called Eric Pace, he succeeded in 1958 in getting their first drama called This Day in Fear, which sadly hasn't survived, which starred Patrick McGowan as the lead actor. Became very famous in a series. I think in America it was called Secret Agent. In Britain it was called Danger Man. And then he
Okay.
created The Prisoner, which I recommend people to watch if they've not watched it before. Kind of very, again, part of TV in the 60s that you couldn't imagine getting put out now. A kind
Right.
of very surrealistic, philosophical kind of series about a man who was held in a village that he can't escape from.
Right. Yeah, it's very surreal. That's one that did make it over here.
Oh,
That
right.
was also, yeah, that was broadcast on PBS, the Public Broadcasting Channel.
Oh, yeah.
So we were able to catch that here.
Mhm.
Um,
So
let,
what happened after that was during the pandemic, when we were all stuck at home for months on end, I decided to go back to Malcolm Hulke and was able to find out more information, make contact with more people who it's very hard to meet anybody who actually knew him because he died in 1979. And so a lot of his contemporaries had passed on. But I did, as you mentioned, speak to Katie Manning about him because she met him when she was in Colony in Space and Frontier in Space. And I made contact with his nephew, Anthony, who remembers him quite well and had helped him because Malcolm was commissioned to write a series in the 60s about football called United, and he knew nothing about football. So his young nephew, who was a football fan, helped him out,
yep.
and Malcolm even paid him for his consultancy. Anthony sent me a copy of the invoice for £30. And I spoke to somebody today by coincidence, Greg, called Paul Simpson, who, as a teenager, a big Doctor Who fan in the sort of mid 70s, literally just one day decided to ring up Terence Dix, was in the phone directory, and he went round to see him at his house in Hampstead, and they, sort of chatted about Doctor Who.
Wow.
I know, just they do. The fact just ring people up and they would not let you come round to their house.
Things were a lot more
And
simple back then.
I know, kind of sweet, isn't it? I think it's a sweet
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
And Terence said to Paul and his friend, "Well, have you, you should go around and see my friend Mac. He's round the corner, literally." So they went round and knocked on his door, I think, or Terence rang up. I'm not sure which. And Malcolm was very welcoming, and they were sort of shared scripts and talked about Doctor Who with them, and used to go and see him every, the end of term every month, and or every couple of months. Malcolm would get cakes for them, and so they think they sort of visited him quite a few times over a couple of years. So that was a really nice story, I think. So again, Paul spoke very well of Malcolm and how welcome he was to these sort of gang of slightly nerdy teenagers.
Now,
And encouraged them to sort of do things. I think they encouraged him to write the War Games, the last novel. Although by that time he was quite ill.
Okay. Now you are working on a biography of Malcolm Hulke.
Yeah, but having gone this far. And also Anthony sent me not only pictures but also documents, letters that Malcolm had written during the Second World War about his experiences, kind of written, I think, during bombing raids. So London was very heavily bombed. I don't know if people know, but what's known as the Blitz. So London was bombed, I think, 70 nights in a row between September 40 and May 41. But despite that, Malcolm wanted to get away from home and go to London. And so he wrote, he used to write to his brother, quite knowledgeable and quite grown up letters. And he was only about 16 or 17. And also one of them where he talks about gay and lesbian people. And he's saying, well, gay people, that's what they're like. And we should just accept it. So he's quite progressive on certain things like sexuality compared to his contemporaries. Compared to his family, I think were quite stuffy. Also made, what else did I get? Oh yeah, I did a talk on the radio, which I managed to get a copy of, called "I Never Went to School," because he didn't. Malcolm grew up in his mother was a single parent. His father had died before he was born, I think, and so mother also ran up lots of debt, so they're always moving, and so moved so much that Malcolm never went to school. I think he was kind of taught by his mother and other people to read and write. But his birth wasn't registered either, which he discovered when he was about after the war. So he had to go through a process of becoming a British citizen, even though he was British, obviously, because he was born in the country. But he had to become naturalised, or it was a kind of complicated bureaucratic procedure. And then he also joined the Communist Party in 1944, I think it was, or 45. Inspired by the sort of the role that the Red Army, the Russian army, played in defeating the Nazis. So he was kind of active in the party, but not a leading figure. And he kind of fell out with it a couple of times, but they became quite suspicious of him. But I think it provided him with a group of people who were interested in politics and art. But I think the Unity Theatre that he got involved in, it was much more, I think, to his kind of taste, I think, sort of creative people. And doing drama, you meet interesting people. Okay. So with that kind of, eventually, he met up with Eric Pace, who was also involved in Unity Theatre. And they finally got, as I said, a drama on screen in 58. And after that, they were working quite constantly. So they wrote a whole science fiction series called Pathfinders in Space, which I think Network on Air are about to reissue. The three series have survived, luckily. All shot in a studio.
And
they got a bit like Doctor Who. I mean, in many ways, it's a lot like a kind of prequel of Doctor Who.
And you said that's called Pathfinders in Space?
Yes. So there were 4
Okay.
series, Target, Luna, and then there was one set on the moon, one set on Mars, and one set on Venus, with this kind of group of adults and children blasting off from Britain in our space program, which you've clearly never heard of. But very much the idea is to teach children about science. So amongst the adventures, there was a lot of little packets of science being delivered to children. As I said, all shot over one evening, probably each week, in a studio in Birmingham. But I think they do quite a good job. And the script's quite imaginative within the terms of the era. I think it works quite well. And then him and Eric went on to write a lot of other drama. And then they kind of stopped working together. And then in the 60s, Malcolm was writing for some of the major series. I mentioned The Avengers, Danger Man, which is quite a very big series, again with Patrick McGowan. And series such as that, They Were Hiding Place, which you might have heard of. But and then Doctor Who. And so that's where he's probably best remembered for.
Okay.
My favourite one, if I had to be pushed to taking a choice, probably be with the War Games, because I think it shows a lot of Malcolm within that. Although he wrote it with Terence, sort of ferocious pace, I think you see a lot of Malcolm in that. The idea of that war is just relentless and pointless, and you never learn what the aliens are called in the War Games if you think about it. or what their planet's
That's
called.
right.
They just talk about the home planet, don't they?
Yeah,
And so
that's
almost uniquely in Doctor Who, we don't know who they are or where their planet is or what it's called. And they
that's
just have
interesting.
titles, the war chief, the security chief, the warlord, etc., etc.
Hmm.
I think it's very much sort of starting off with the ultimate pointless war, the First World War. I think
Right.
that's very much, I think, Malcolm's view that people are stuck in this war and they can no longer remember when it started or why they're there.
I want to read that biography when you have it out. Does it have a title yet?
I think I've gone through various titles. I think at the moment it's called "Don't Believe Everything You See,"
Oh,
which I
really?
think is a quote from one of the doctors, probably the Patrick Troughton, I think it, but nothing. Maybe nothing. Yeah, I think no. I think it's called "Nothing Is What It Seems." That's I got it wrong. Can't even remember the title.
Okay.
I think it's called "Nothing Is What It Seems," which is a Patrick Troughton quote. I think from again, a lot of Malcolm's work is about deception. I think, not like in if you don't mind me talking about it a bit more. The faceless ones. These are the people that you see aren't the real people, are they? They're aliens, and the aircraft isn't an aircraft; it's a spaceship. And so in the war games, you think it's the First World War. If you do nothing about it, for the first 10, 15 minutes, you would think, oh, they're stuck in the First World War. And then suddenly something happens. And you think, well, that's not right. What's going on? So again, nothing there is what it seems. And that sort of goes on through, I think, a lot of, like in Frontier in Space, it seems that the attacks are being made by aliens on each other, the Draconians attacking the Earthmen attacking the Draconians. But again, it's all deception, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And the same with his last one, dinosaurs, the invasion of dinosaurs. People think they're in a spaceship going somewhere else, but they're not. They're stuck in a cellar in London. So it's all about nothing. What I think is one of the driving points is, I think Malcolm makes is question everything and don't take
Right.
it on face value.
Very interesting. Hmm. Um, I was wanting to ask you about the working class movement library. Could you describe what that is and how long you've been a member?
It's not a kind of place to join, but I've been involved with it on and off for about 40 years. As I said, I sort of first met Ruth and Eddie Frau in their own home in about 1980 and was astounded by this sort of ordinary house in the suburbs of Manchester, packed full of priceless, although they didn't collect them for the money, but for what they contained. So they valued books as a source of knowledge as a kind of map to the past. I think really that was Ruth. They had amazing stuff that nobody else was interested in. I say a whole room full of Thomas Paine's writings, Chartism, trade unionism, socialism, women's movement, and so on. So it moved to a place in Salford in '87 in a much bigger house, which is now full. So stuff has come in over the years, and we bought lots of books and so on. People kind of arrive with plastic bags full of things. Got quite a lot in America, actually, the American labor movement. I mean, people probably don't know there was quite a strong American socialist movement in the early 20th century. Eugene Debs and Arthur Jones and figures like that. So it sort of exists to keep a record of the past and make people, I suppose, realize that the rights that you have didn't arrive on a plate. That if your half-deed society we might have at the moment has only been acquired by the dint of a lot of people struggling and fighting and campaigning over many years.
Now, you have a blog which is called Red Flag Walks. And for people that are watching this on YouTube, there's going to be a link to that down below. If you're listening to audio, just go to YouTube and you'll be able to find the link that way. Now, one of your published works is Never Counted Out, a biography of the Black Manchester boxer and communist Lynn Johnson. Could you tell us about that?
Oh, yeah, certainly, Greg. Yeah, thanks for asking.
Yes, sir.
So this is my first book. So one of the things that happened was when I first met Ruth and Eddie Frow in their house was to ask about what they had on the history of the black community in Manchester, because recently there'd been some rioting in Manchester and there's a lot of antagonism between the black community and the police. This may sound familiar.
Yeah,
Um,
unfortunately, it does.
yeah, so they showed me stuff about Len Johnson, who was born in Manchester. His father was from West Africa. He come to England in the 1890s. So one of the odd things about Manchester, although it's a long way inland, 30 miles, it was connected to the sea. In 1894, they built a huge canal, from the coast of England right up to the edge of Manchester to bring the ships, the ocean-going ships, into the centre of Manchester in a huge amount, sort of array of docks, and that brought in ships from Africa, and some of the sailors kind of jumped off and never went back home.
Hmm.
And one of them was Len's father, William Benker Johnson. He's from what is now Sierra Leone, I think. And so Len was born in Manchester. In the early 1900s, his father had been a boxer, and he took up boxing reluctantly. And he was a very good boxer, but because he was mixed race, black father, white mother, he wasn't considered for British titles. So it wasn't until after the Second War, to the 1940s, that black boxers in Britain were allowed to fight for British titles. So I think the experiences of that and other things that happened to him, this is when the black community in Britain was quite small, kind of turned him quite radically to the left, and he became a communist. Again, a bit like Malcolm. He joined, I think, during the war. So people saw the Soviet Union as a kind of place where men and women were equal and all races were equal. I mean, obviously, you may question some of it, but that was a genuine belief. And they believed that the West should be like that as well. So Len kind of educated himself through the party. I mean, he'd been sort of fighting and boxing for most of his life, but he became a very keen student, and he got to know Paul Robeson. If people know who Paul Robeson, remember who Paul Robeson was. He was a major figure as a singer, as an actor, as a sort of spokesperson for the black community in America. Very shockingly persecuted by J. Edgar Hoover and the American government. And they took away his passport at one point. But Len was friendly with Robeson, and I think Robeson sang at a club that Len was running in Manchester. So I kind of went through a lot of research. It took me about 10 years in the pre-internet years, reconstructed Len's career. I spoke to people who knew him, and there was various documents that survived. And I was able to write a biography of him, which I think has brought him back into more of a public view.
Wow, very interesting.
The whole point of history, to me anyway, of writing,
Exactly.
is to spread what you know, not to hang
Okay.
on to it, but to share it, which is why I'm delighted to be doing this
So,
broadcast with you, Graham.
well, thank you very much. This is fascinating. And so when you learned that Len Johnson's father was from Sierra Leone in West Africa, you had to learn that on paper with real documents, correct?
Yes, there were people who had met him, or I can't remember exactly, there were people who knew him or met him, and there was a lot of, William Benker Johnson, and his son was Leonard Benker Johnson.
Wow.
Again, the pre-internet days, they couldn't really research in the way that you would now. I mean, to reconstruct Len's boxing career, I literally read through Sporting Chronicle week by week, which used to record every boxing match in Britain, and if you were lucky, gave a little account of it. And then there was also commentary, quite a lot of controversy about the fact that Len wasn't allowed to fight for titles, which again, I'm sure echoes. And interestingly, that and then I was kind of expert on boxing at one point, even though I mean, the history of Jack Johnson, the first black heavyweight in the world, and the way that he was treated by the white establishment, who were appalled at the fact that he kept on beating white fighters, sent them against him. And then Joe Louis in the 30s, the next sort of major black figure, but very much controlled, I think, Again, he used to knock down every opponent, but if you watch the pictures, he just steps away from his defeated opponent. He doesn't glory, whereas Muhammad Ali was a complete reverse, wasn't he? Which again, why he was both a hero and hated so much, because he sort of didn't hide his ability, and he kind of reveled in the notoriety or fame and so on. He wasn't apologetic for being a black boxer, wasn't apologetic for his religion, whatever you may sort of think of it personally. Because I think in sport was never just sport. I mean, the thing that came across to me when I was reading Len was that one of the reasons they gave for not letting Len fight white fighters was the people, the establishment, the Lord Lonsdales and others say, well, fights between black and white are never just fights. They always have a sort of political edge. You know, it's about the empire, because the whole myth of the British Empire was it was white superiority. We, the British, occupy other people's countries because they are, in the end, kind of children and inferior races who need the guidance of the sort of white British Empire. And so those kind of fights, a bit like when Joe Louis fought, what's the guy's name? Max Schmeling, wasn't it? The German boxer in 36. It became a huge thing about this black German boxer from Nazi Germany fighting a black boxer from America. Joe Louis won, by the way, but it acquired, an enormous import, much more than just being a fight.
Okay. You are actually the correct person to ask this. I just realized this. Something has always confused me about where, let's say, someone has a black father or mother and the other is white. They're considered black. I simply can't comprehend why that is. And I wish that I could remember the name of the actor that said this. He played Cisco in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And I don't remember the actor's name right now, but I was reading an interview with him and he said, first off, I'm not black, I'm brown. And that kind of stuck in my mind, because technically there are no black and white people. Well, I guess albinism, if someone's albino, they're very close to being white. But I don't understand why brown and pink people are considered black and white. Do you think that way of thinking will ever go away?
Well, it's not about the color we are, isn't it? In some sense, it's what that signifies. It's a way of dividing people up. So you could easily divide the world up into left-handed people. We could discriminate. Well, they used to discriminate a bit against left-handed people. So I mean, I can't speak for mixed race people. They have to make their mind up about who they are. I mean, essentially, we are the same human beings. And the skin color is minor. If you're an alien and landed, you probably think, well, you all look alike to me. Wouldn't be able to tell. But the sort of essentially, it's about dividing people up and saying, well, this is us and you are the other, which again is a lot about what goes on in Doctor Who, isn't it? It's people saying, here we are and you lot over there are the others. We define ourselves against you. And so what you define yourself can be skin color. It might be something else, we might discriminate against everybody who's got ginger hair. Or I mean, because we occupied Africa and most people there were black, although don't forget there's an Arab population in the north of Africa. Right. Therefore, it became a signifier. But it only means something if you recognize it. So maybe in 100, 200 years' time, we will no longer notice the difference between ourselves because we will have moved on as society, although it's taking a hell of a long time, isn't it? I mean, you think you still haven't recovered in America from the Civil War and the Emancipation, have you? I'm not sort of blaming you, but those are still, in some sense, live issues within American society. You haven't really resolved the issue of the slavery.
It is taking too long. I will agree with you on that. On another one of your published books, it was For the Sake of the Women Who Are to Come After.
Oh yeah.
Manchester's Radical Women from 1914 to 1945. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, so you mentioned Red Flag Walk. So originally this was,
Mhm.
I used to do history walks around Manchester, for quite a few years. And when I left work in 2011, I used to do them a lot more just to earn a bit of extra money. But because of those walks, I started to specialise. So I do Black History one, the Irish in Manchester, and then did women in Manchester, and I acquired a great deal of information about women, which was much too voluminous just to put into a 90-minute walk. So eventually I evolved the idea of turning them in, creating a book. So I did one which covered the period from 1819 through to 1918, excuse me, when women got the vote in Britain. So Manchester was a major centre for the campaign for the vote from the 1860s right through to 1918. And then I had a lot more information which I hadn't used. So I then did another book, which you just mentioned, which covered the periods from the First World War. So women now had the vote. And the question is, what next?
Right.
Because there are very few, despite women getting the vote, there's very few women MPs in Parliament, a handful. In fact, one in 1918, Countess Markievicz, who was an Irish Republican. So she refused to recognise the Westminster government, so she never took a seat.
Oh,
Uh,
she refused
and
to recognize it.
yes, so she belonged to an organisation, Irish nationalist organisation called Sinn Féin, Ourselves Alone. So they set up their own parliament in Dublin because they won the majority in the votes. But the Irish British government refused to recognise this. And then a very brutal war ensued up until 21 when British allowed part of Ireland to become free, or partly free anyway. It's a bit more complicated than that, but we haven't got the time to go into it.
Okay.
But there, even though women had won the vote, there was still a lot of discrimination. And you could be sacked for being pregnant. Women generally weren't paid the same as men. Lots of professions were still barred to them, or if they were in sort of certain jobs, they never became the managers, never became the directors, they never became, like there weren't lots of, so basically they were kept in fairly low paid, unskilled jobs most of the time, with a minority of middle class women. So
Seems
the
like
book,
there's a really. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
oh, sorry, the book kind of looked at some of the campaigns, and also women's involvement in things like the Spanish Civil War. Women went from Manchester as nurses in the 1936-39 Civil War in Spain and so on.
Sounds like there's a lot of really unfortunate similarities between England and the U.S. that I did not realize. Very similar, very close similarities.
Hmm.
Um, so I was reading a piece that you sent me last night. Thank you. Sarah Parker Remond, a Black American abolitionist in Britain, 1859 to 1866. I'm starting to see a pattern here.
So again, that kind of became part of my research, looking at the role of women in Manchester. And I came across Sarah speaking in Manchester, and so she was a lady from. People forget that although there were the slave states, there were also in the north supposedly free states. A lot of black people living there, although they were still subject to a lot of discrimination. So Sarah grew up in Salem, Massachusetts, and then her family became very friendly with William Lloyd Garrison, who was one of the leading anti-slavery abolitionists, started some of the early abolitionist societies and a newspaper in the 1830s, 1840s. And it became an increasingly bitter debate, and the divisions started to emerge, which led to the Civil War in 1861 about should the new states, as they joined the Union, be allowed to have slaves or not. And clearly the South wanted the new states to have it, and the North thought that the future was an industrial society and not a slave rural society. So that became the sort of division. Obviously, when Lincoln became elected in 1860, the country, the Confederacy was set up. So by this period, Sarah was a sort of abolitionist speaker, speaking first in the States, mostly on the East Coast, I think. And then she came to Britain in 1859 and spent several years speaking against slavery around Britain. And obviously, in 1861, the Civil War broke out. And her brother was also a speaker for the abolitionist movement, Charles, and he helped set up the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, I think it is. It was a black regiment in 1863, which fought a battle at, what's it called? Wagner Hill, I think. There's quite a famous painting of it. So, you know, in some sense, and I think Frederick Douglass urged black men to join the Union Army and set up black regiments. So eventually Sarah went off to Italy and became a doctor, by the way. So had a really interesting life, never went back to America.
Oh, really? So when she left England in 1866, she went to Italy and did not go
Yes,
back to America?
that's correct. Yeah, so she died in Rome, I think it was about 1890. There's a plaque to her there. I should send you the printed version of it, shouldn't I? She's got the pictures in.
Yeah, I would like to see that.
Yeah, I'll try and copy it for you. So
Okay.
that was essentially. So I thought this is a very interesting. There's quite a lot of toing and froing between America and Britain, in this period. I came across, can't remember her name now, but there was an American lady who spoke at a congress in Manchester who'd been a doctor in the Union Army during the Civil War. So, in some sense, America is more progressive than Britain in some of the ways, and also and then less progressive in other ways. But that's
Right.
that's different kind of societies.
So you blog on science fiction at Fantasies of Possibility. What is that exactly?
Well, because I've always enjoyed science fiction, and again, had more time after I left work, or seemed to have. I started to write about it. So the fantasy, the possibility is a quote from H.G. Wells that he never called it science fiction what he wrote. I mean, H.G. Wells, if your viewers haven't read him, they really should, because he kind of more or less single-handedly created what we think of as science fiction in
Right.
a very short period with the War of the Worlds,
Right. Yeah.
where malevolent beings with heat rays inside metal machines terrorize
Right.
the world. That
Yeah. I
sounds
just recently read a documentary on the making of the War of the Worlds.
oh yeah.
It was very interesting. That they definitely got everybody back then, and it's what a
I
shock.
think Wales wanted to try was his public was to show them again about what life would be like if you were invaded, because the British Empire and I suppose the Americans as well, when they started going into countries, you got superior technology and overwhelming force, and you could subdue the population. So what Wales does in War of the World is try and make his readers feel it from the other way, what it would be
Wow.
like the population that's conquered. So
I
these
did not.
aliens land,
I
and I think we'll think, well, we could just wipe them out, can't we? We'll send the army with a few shells, and then these huge machines suddenly stand up with their heat rays and just wipe everything out, and everyone's fleeing in terror, and society collapses until the sort of Martians are killed off by bacteria. So yeah, that's the time machine. I don't think anybody ever written a story in that way about time travel. So Morris invented that genre as well, and quite an interesting, but also quite pessimistic view of the future, where the sort of time traveler. Yeah, we never learn what the time traveler's name is. He's always just called the time traveler. He arrives in the far future where society has two classes: the Eloi living above the ground, who seem sort of having a idyllic life, and the Morlocks below ground, until you discover the Morlocks come out at night and eat the Eloi. So not quite, again, nothing is what it seems.
That is very interesting. And I did not realize that the time traveler did not have a name.
Hmm.
How in the world? And how did that work?
Well,
Uh,
because the way it works is he starts off with him telling his friends, and so the part of the tale is related by a friend, and the friend just calls him the time traveler, and he
okay.
goes off, and then he comes back all disheveled, and he sort of reads, and then the time traveler tells a tale, and then at the end he goes off on another visit and never comes back. So then the things like the Invisible Man. So Wells looks at what would it be like if you were invisible, and
Right.
it's less It's more problematic than you might imagine.
No doubt. Well, I really appreciate your time in doing this today. We're getting near the end here, so thank
Oh,
you
that's
for
fine.
hanging in there. This interview series is intended in part, first of all, it's meant to be fun and entertaining, as well as educational, but it's intended in part to try to study some possible shared experiences and elements of successful people. And I do consider you to be a success, obviously. So that this next question here, and a genius, not just a success. So uh, in the worlds of Doctor Who and beyond, I've been interviewing authors, actors, artists, directors, and musicians, um, to try to find common trends that seem to affect everyone. And I've found one of them, which is it's unfortunate, and it's called rejection. And for authors and actors in particular, it seems to be unfortunately common. Have you ever experienced rejection, such as a book idea that you may have pitched that
Hmm.
didn't work out as you wished? And how did you deal with that?
Well, it's happening all the time to me at the moment. So something else I've researched is a woman journalist from Manchester who was a kind of pioneering journalist on the Manchester Guardian and wrote hundreds of articles, book reviews, theatre reviews, travelled around Europe in 1919, 1920 in the post-war sort of devastation. So a very interesting woman, pioneered the Woman's Page, was a picture editor when there were sort of very few women doing all this. So I thought she was a very interesting woman, and I kind of gathered together all her writings, which took me about several years to transcribe, literally from typing them out. But I thought, well, people are bound to be interested in this. But so far, I've got
Mhm.
dozens of rejections, so I just kind of carry on.
Wow.
But
Okay.
I think we do have alternatives, Greg, now, don't we? We can, if you want, just publish it yourself on the internet, or you can do it as a blog.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
done it. I've done her work as a blog, so it's available. But I kind of thought it'd be nice to see it printed because she was a kind of
Right.
print journalist. But I may just do it as a book at some point and let people access it that way. I think one of the good things about the internet, and there's a lot of bad things about it, is the possibility of producing material yourself, a bit like punk, actually. You know,
Hmm.
for years you kind of thought, well, to become a successful rock band, you have to sort of have a thing with Atlantic or EMI or whatever, or Parlophone, and then suddenly in punk thought, oh, we could just make a record and put it out ourselves and get it played on
Right.
the radio, and people will buy it, which is what happened for a few years. So I think with kind of self-publishing, then you can put it
Okay.
out yourself, and if people are interested. But again,
So
a bit like podcasts, you don't what you're doing now. You don't have to have a sort of major studio in the center of San Francisco, do you?
no,
You're
no,
probably
it's
doing it from your living room or something like that. So
exactly that. It is the living room. It's not the ideal setting because it's two stories, so there's a lot of echo.
yeah,
But all you need is a computer and a backdrop
the first
and of course
first
a
thing you
Dalek.
clearly heard, yeah. Every studio should have its own Dalek.
Yeah, the
Um,
Dalek is
most
90%.
importantly, you've got a what we in Britain call a sofa or a settee. So
Right.
if you've got a settee or a sofa to sit on,
We
that's
call it
all.
a couch.
Yeah, couch.
The-
Or
Here,
a
the, here the
chaise
kids hide
longue.
behind the couch.
Yeah.
So
I
you're
just think
not an outlier. You're not an outlier. You've experienced rejection as well. So
that's
after
that's
13 times, is that when you quit pitching?
well, I thought you just carry on, and then when you run out of publishers, then you think, well, what do I do next? It's, I mean, also whether I'll get the Malcolm Hulke thing, well, A, if I ever finish it, and
Right.
B, when I get it published. But then you could just, if necessary,
You
put it
know,
on the net. But I don't know if people know, but there's a site called archive.org,
mhm.
which has got a vast amounts of material uploaded onto it. So it's a good place to go for obscure 19th century books. But also, it's got a thing called Wayback Machine,
Are those
which,
both the same? I was thinking archive.org is the Wayback Machine.
yes, so they are, it's part of the same thing. So this
Right.
allows you to access websites of the past.
Mhm.
And so if you're looking for something which has vanished, you can still find it. So that's very useful, I think. I think again that's the good thing about the internet, that it never goes away unless
Right.
you've got the major government department behind you to completely wipe it from the internet. But that's quite hard, isn't
Right.
it?
You know what? That reminded me of a question here. You said Malcolm Polk had passed away in 1979.
That's correct. Yes, correct.
So did you ever get to meet him?
No,
No.
I
Okay.
no no I met no again. I was only I didn't really wasn't involved in any research on Doctor Who. We were just trying to
Okay.
survive the onset of Mrs. Thatcher at that point.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And we were trying to buy gas at that time. Um, so
You had you had Ronald Reagan to look forward to.
yeah, no doubt. Um, so we're gonna shift gears here right near the end. Um, what did you do during the wilderness years when Doctor Who was dead and presumed over?
Oh right.
Well, you know what? I shouldn't say it like that. It wasn't dead. Fans kept it alive.
Yes, I mean I wasn't
Um,
involved
I
in
was what I yeah, what I mean is when the television series
yeah.
ended, it was dead. You know, what did you do during that decade
Yeah.
and a half?
I think I was what just went on to start watching other things or had other things to do. So it wasn't such a huge part of my life. In some
Okay.
sense, probably more part of my life now than it was then.
Okay.
So I suppose you just thought it was never going to come back. So it
Right.
was a real surprise and revelation when Russell T Davis and the others succeeded in getting the BBC to bring it back. I suppose, like,
Yep.
yeah, I mean, I enjoy the new series. It's nice to have it back. But I suppose my heart really is in. I think this is mixed up with your childhood and adolescence and that period of your life. I suppose my heart is with the classic series, as we now call it,
Right.
because that's what I watched and grew up on. So, and it kind of, if I watch Patrick Troughton, it kind of takes me back to that period of my life, and I sort of greatly enjoy and William Hartnell because they're what I grew up with. So that's the kind of thing I
Right.
really enjoy. I guess I really liked Jodie. I don't understand why people were critical. Seemed fine to me. I don't understand why people get so angry about it. In the
Well,
end,
I
if you don't like this episode, there'll be another one not long next week, and then you can hopefully be a bit
yeah,
more in tune with what you want. I
I
don't
have
think.
my own theory on that. I have a background in music. I'm a radio DJ, and Grego is my handle on National Public Radio. And I guess if you're doing interviews and putting them on YouTube, you're supposed to use your radio handle, right? I don't know, but I've interviewed a lot of musicians, so music is probably on my mind just as much as Doctor Who. And I believe that the Jodie Whittaker era was mimicking a trend of other television where incidental music has pretty much been abandoned and replaced with what I call weird undulating sounds.
Mm,
And I think that one of the things that may have turned people off from that era uh, was the music that BBC ordered. And I'm not blaming the composer. I believe the
mm,
composer did exactly what they were hired for. And I believe BBC took a real wrong turn when it came to the
mm.
music. But that's just my opinion. And
I
I
guess
don't
I'm
really
quite.
care. I'd
I
rather
suppose I,
have Doctor Who that people are complaining about than to have
yeah.
no Doctor Who.
I suppose I think I quite like. I mean, I quite like that music they created because it's because if you listen to things like in the '60s or even the '70s, like what's a really weird one? Oh, the Sea Devils. I mean, the
Hmm.
music in that is really strange, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
I quite like that. So I quite like it. I mean, I like a big fan of electronic music anyway. So
Yeah.
and the recent music I liked really. I was a bit bored with the
Did you
sort of
really?
grandiose orchestral stuff because if I want to grandiose orchestral stuff, I can listen to Mozart.
Right. Right.
But I mean, I don't hate you for saying that, Greg.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you. It's, people can get real worked up when they have their own
Yeah.
opinions. And you know why? Because I think that people, when they have a strong feeling like that, they believe that other people are going to be thinking the same way. And
Mm,
it's interesting how worked up fans can get about certain things. I
yeah.
consider myself to be somewhat neutral.
Mm,
As much as I love Doctor Who, it's I didn't like the timeless children thing though. But
No, I thought that kind of went. Although it's great to see. God, brain's gone. The very wonderful actress who played the veteran
oh,
actress,
the I know I can't remember her name right now.
Barbara Flynn, who was a wonderful actress,
Okay.
and she had that part as I can't remember what began with T, didn't it? But yeah, I thought the whole Flux I thought was really good.
Yeah, I couldn't understand it. I,
Yeah,
I have no idea what happened in Flux, but it was great.
yeah,
It was very cinematic.
yes. And the New Year, the one set in a warehouse over New Year with the that they kept having.
Revolution of the Daleks?
Yes,
Or no, no, no.
Yeah, I
No,
think that
yeah,
was.
well,
I
I don't
really
think it.
enjoyed that because I think
Yeah, I did too.
it was kind of clever, and the idea you just keep on repeating something on a sort of diminishing. Also, it's
Yeah.
quite funny when the Dalek turned up and said, "I'm not Nick," and obviously
Yeah,
we all.
that's exactly what I was just about to say. The Nicholas Briggs, who is an author and I guess one of the founders of Big Finish, that does the voice of the Daleks. Yeah, that got a huge laugh from me when he goes, "I am not Nick." Yeah, that was
That was,
great. I wonder if he put that in there. I wonder if they let
yeah, I'm
him
sure just as a little
insert that
joke,
line.
just a
So,
joke for the joke for the hardcore fans. I
right.
recommend. It's a real shame they stopped doing it, but the Nick and something broadcast was they used to do a broadcast about classic TV, which is Nick and Benji podcast. It's sadly come to an end, but Nicholas Briggs and Benji, who does the music of Big Finish, used to do this sort of weekly sort of looking at series like Doctor Who. But in fact, most of the ones you mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
the Tomorrow.
Did you say the one with Nick and Benji? That's still going. I listen to that every week.
It stopped. They've stopped doing it.
Are you?
Yeah. Well, they do a Big Finish one. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's big. They're on Big Finish now.
Yeah. Well, they did another one which looked at other stuff. Doctor Who, Survivors, the very good version of the Day of Triffids, the only good version of the Day of Triffids done on TV, and many other ones.
I did
But they're
not know
not
that.
doing. Oh, right. Well, yeah. But
Wow.
I'll send you the link if you're not seeing
Okay.
it.
Yes,
You can
please.
you can catch up on it, but it just comes to an end, sadly. But they go through a lot of stuff. So some of
Okay.
those theories that you might not be less familiar with from that list at the start, they talk about, and if you're lucky, you might be able to track them down.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah, that's very interesting. I had no idea, and I enjoyed that talk so much that I'm up waiting for it to be released. I listen to that every single week. So when did you watch Rose live when Doctor Who returned in 2005?
Oh yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah, I really
That's
enjoyed it. Hmm.
well. There's a 100% right there because I've interviewed about 15 people and every single person was watching that live.
Yeah.
So
Why,
that's
if you enjoy Doctor Who, why wouldn't you be watching?
you're right. Right. How did you feel about it
I really
being
enjoyed
back?
it. Yeah, I thought they kind
Yeah.
of. Yeah, I don't. I'm not a sort of. I'm not a super. I don't feel I own the show. And I also think that people aren't working very hard to make the show bad. I don't always like what the storylines or whatever, but I know that a lot of people are working very hard to the best of their ability to make something that hopefully I'll enjoy. So I don't understand again why people get so angry.
Right. Right.
I don't know.
Okay. Okay.
So
So on to go. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I know that this is my peace and love mission in Doctor Who work.
Well, you said you don't get on the forums. That's
No,
probably good. I don't either. I haven't for years now.
I
It's
don't
just
listen to. What do I listen to? Oh yeah, the which I recommend to people if they don't listen to it. Toby Hadoke, his
oh yeah.
podcast, I think is astonishing. In fact, I
Yeah.
don't know.
Toby Hadoke
I think
is
he's been
cool.
clearly held prisoner in a cellar somewhere by the aliens who force him to do it every week because I don't know how he keeps on doing it.
Yeah, yeah. That's a gentleman that I'm quite interested in right there.
You should
Toby.
get him on your show.
I don't know if I should say yet. Okay, so
Eventually, it's
here's your
some like preview at some point is going to do the war games, by the way, because I did it for him. But if you're listening, Toby, I'm still waiting.
really okay.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
he's
really
easy to
true.
find. Yeah,
It's great.
he's easy to find.
Yeah, so
Um,
yeah, you should get him to come on. He'll talk about Doctor Who endlessly. He's getting to, but
I would absolutely love to interview Toby Hiddoke.
yeah. Well, after you can only say no, can't you? But he's pretty generous with his time, I think. So,
You know,
sorry, got any last? I've interrupted you. Got any last questions, Greg? Or
okay.
before you need to feed the Dalek?
Yeah, okay. We covered the Jodie Whittaker era. Russell T Davies, when he resurrected Doctor Who, he brought about notable changes to the show, which are being scrutinized even more closely today. And as we know, he's going to be returning as the showrunner again. Well, I believe
Yeah,
he is now already.
yeah, they're
And
making it now. Yeah.
right now, an example would be introducing sexual agendas, which some may call woke, into an historically family friendly program, which has always included the kids hiding behind the sofa or here behind the couch, and hiding from the Daleks, of course. Do you believe that when Doctor Who returned in 2005, that it in some way lost its innocence when it came to being family friendly?
Um, I think let's think. Let me think about that a second. Well, actually, when I watch some of the old series, I'm amazed how violent it is. You know, that people are
Okay.
sort of bumped off or
Yeah.
killed, not gruesomely, but fairly frequently. What's the one of the sort of the things you wouldn't do now? Oh yeah, Keys of Marinus, where I think in the first episode, one of the Vords gets into the big pyramid thing, and then Arbiton, played by George Coulouris, I think stabs him. I think,
Right.
and so you're thinking, well, this is okay, mate. And so when I watched it, I thought, and other incidents, actually the same one, Keys of Marinus being Barbara stuck in a sort of snow-trapped cabin, being chased around by somebody who clearly has more than a peck on the cheek in mind. So there's quite a lot of violence and threat, I would say, lots of threat in Doctor Who. And again, lots of characters are killed off. The war games, a lot of people are bumped. I don't know what the body count is. What's the I think in one of the Dalek ones, in the fifth Doctor era, the one where Tegan leaves at the end. There are like 60 or 70 people killed, and everyone's dead at the end except the Doctor and Tegan, I think. So it's, I think if people think of it as a kind of innocent show, it wasn't quite as innocent as you might think. But in terms of what they didn't have generally was romantic involvement, really, except just right very occasionally where Vicky leaves at the end of the Mythmakers because she's fallen in love with can't remember his name now, but one of the Trojans, I think, and Leela leaves at the end of one of the, I think, because she has fallen for somebody, but really these are only likely sketched in romantic attachments, aren't they, generally? So
Right.
bringing the sort of Doctor falling in love or people falling in love with the Doctor. I mean, for me, I'm old-fashioned. I didn't think it needed it, but what Russell was trying to do was make the show relevant to today's age.
Okay.
So he very firmly set Rose in the contemporary era of 2005. Rose has got a job. She lives in a fairly ordinary flat with her mother. She goes out to work. She gets caught behind hours in this sort of big building, and suddenly the Doctor turns up. So it's very much rooted in contemporary society in a way that the Doctor Who rarely was in the 1960s, or only very occasionally when the War Machines, for instance, is set in contemporary London, isn't it? So again, what he wanted to do, I think, was he couldn't bring the show back the way it was before because it wouldn't work. So he wanted to both bring it back and make it. Also, if you'd never seen Doctor Who before, you would still enjoy this show called Doctor Who. You didn't need to know anything about it before. I think that was eventually their mission at the start of it. So if you if you had seen it before, you would probably recognize some of the things, but you didn't need to know anything really to enjoy it. But that would be my analysis anyway, what he was trying to achieve. And by and large, gradually they did bring back some of the old things. They did bring the Daleks and the Cybermen and some of the old familiar, the Davros. I was so bored with Davros. I'm quite bored with the Daleks. I don't know what more you can do with the Daleks.
There's been a lot of Dalek stories. That's definitely for sure. You listen to Big Finish, don't you?
Yes, I do. Yes, because they're old Who generally. So I'm listening to one at the moment with Leela, and many of the old sort of the great, one with Lalla Ward playing Romana. So there's a whole endless. Don't ask me to tell you the plot, but I kind of just enjoyed. I think Leela, Sue Louise Jameson is become even more scary as Leela than she was 40 years ago.
Yeah,
it's nice to hear Tom Baker and some of the and some of the old Doctors though.
Yeah, it's I wish I had more time to listen to those. I do try to listen to the Tom Baker ones, and
yeah,
and I do.
You have to pick your Doctor and stay with them, I think, because there's just so much that comes out. Although, luckily, my local library buys them, so I don't actually have to pay for them. I get
nice. That is great. We have our local library system. You can catch them on there occasionally. So, did I ask you who is your doctor?
I think I said that William Hartnell and the Patrick Trout and other sort of doctors because they won so much. I mean, again, what people have forgotten is, when I've reached why they should know is that Doctor Who in the 60s was on all the time. It was on like 48 weeks a year. I mean, it kind of wore the actors out, I think. That's why I think William Hartnell in the end was kind of, even though he wasn't such an old man as it looks. And again, Patrick Troughton were just kind of burned out, I think. So when it came back, there's a lot less of it, and also they're longer episodes. So there was less of it, so you didn't burn your actors out quite as much. But so they just seem to be on all the time. So that's the era, I suppose, I kind of returned to.
Okay. You know what? We better wrap this up. I don't want to burn you out. And I just realized we've been on a marathon here. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
I'm glad I got to ask you that last question about Russell T Davies's approach to the 2005 revival, because you just taught me something, and I appreciate that. How do you feel about the new upcoming David Tennant specials with the return of Russell T Davies, as we just mentioned, where the fans have coined him as RTD2, and of course had you heard that before? You hadn't? Okay, yeah, that's been going around online. I wish I could claim coining that, but I didn't. And then, of course, we have Ncuti Gatwa coming up. What do you think about the future here for Doctor Who?
Well, hopefully it'll be bright and cheerful, and we won't argue about it too much. I'm slightly puzzled that they're bringing David back, but why not? I mean, especially you want to do something different. I mean, the whole point about Doctor Who is that it changes all the time. It's never the same repetition. So why not bring back an old Doctor, I suppose? But it did kind of, in a way, bring them back in the 3 Doctors, the 5 Doctors, and the 2 Doctors, but not for not for a whole series. So he's going to do 3 specials. But yeah, I mean, I liked his energy that David brought to it, and again, he was good at being funny. The whole thing about Doctor Who is, I suppose, from the Tom Baker onwards, it was kind of bit humorous, and definitely with Tom Baker became quite funny. I suppose there's far too much. The trouble with a lot of science fiction is there's no humour in it. It's just, I unfortunately went to see Dune. It's just like 3 hours of sort of soulless monotony with nobody cracking any jokes. So there's more humour in 10 minutes of Doctor Who than there was the whole of Dune. So folks, don't go and watch it. So again, the humor in science fiction, I think, is one of the unique strengths of Doctor Who, I think, isn't it? Jodie is very, very good at it. As a have you ever seen the film she was in, by the way?
No, I have not.
Right. Well, she plays a sort of woman, young woman who spends a lot of her time in this might seem familiar. Spends a lot of time in a shed creating little science fiction stories.
Really? What is that called? What's the name of that?
I'll have to look it up and send it to you, Greg. But
Okay.
it's a very
Okay.
sweet kind of drama about she's lost a brother. She keeps saying him because he keeps popping up, but he's actually not there anymore, and she's
Hmm.
left on her own, coping with life. So it's a very, and she's very good in it, Jodie. Well, she's a very good actress, full stop, isn't she? But it's kind of
Hmm.
sweet and charming. So anyway, I must let you go, and you need to go feed the Cybermen or Daleks, whatever you do in the evenings.
Okay. All right. Hey, listen, thank you so much. Now, I want to remind people that your contribution is in the book that was just released, which is called Survival TV, 1970s Britain and the Television Series. And for people that have enjoyed this discussion, I don't have to tell you that you're going to enjoy that book because uh, here's one of the contributors. And this has been a very fun and interesting conversation, and I really appreciate your time. I'm honored to have had a chance to meet you and interview you, sir. I really appreciate it.
Well, I'm very pleased that you've enjoyed it. I very much enjoyed it too, and happy to come back anytime. Want to talk about some other science fiction, and we could do A for Andromeda, for instance.
Okay, yeah, you have my contact info.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes, we will. Anytime you like.
Okay,
So,
that's very good of you, Greg. So
okay,
say hello to your partner for me. I'm sorry not to have
we'll
met
do.
her,
Okay.
and left her out of that room sometime.
All right.
Just hope
All right.
she's not Mrs. Rochester. Okay, Greg. It's nice to meet you, and we'll meet
Same
again.
here. Okay.
Okay, take
Take
care,
care and have a nice evening.
and I hope I wish your viewers well.
Okay. Thank you so much. They will enjoy this, no doubt.
Yeah, great.
So
Okay.
thanks
Bye.
to you. Take care.